that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. So lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with me, George Harvey, and the famous Tom Fennell.
In the flesh.
Man about town, philosopher, philanthropist, and engineer. I'm an engineer too, but a different kind of engineer.
This is what I look like for those of you who don't see me much.
There you go.
People ask me why I don't appear much on here. I ought to talk to whoever is controlling the cameras. And that's me. I'm going to put George up here.
We have Tom is the engineer, the show's engineer. So he talks about engineering things that have to do with energy, and he also does the...
And I got the mouse.
He's got the mouse. What can I say? Every day I get up early. Today I was up at about 5 minutes before 4. And I look at news about energy and climate change, and I gather 10 to 15 news items that are interesting, do a 50-word or so synopsis of each, and put the accumulate 10 or 15 of those and put them into a blog called geoharvey.com, named after me.
That's clever. Yeah, isn't it?
And you can go to geoharvey.com and see the stories that we're going to be talking about. Today is the 27th of July. We're recording this. So we're going to start a week ago on the 20th of July, and we've got about 21 items.
This is the best of the blog.
The best of the blog.
And of course, George lets me know in advance what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So I read them.
There's a separate blog that has the best of the blog on it, and there are actually a few people who go there. Not for me.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, but anyway.
Well, if I'm reading them and I notice some of them that are particularly interesting, I'll try and call it to your attention.
Yeah.
We don't have time. We could devote the whole show sometimes to just one of these things.
Almost any one.
Almost any one.
Of course, part of the problem is some of them are very, very short, so we'd have to do a little more research. But let's start into this, okay?
Yeah.
Our first item here is from Clean Technica.
Let me pull up my sign
and
here. We got a picture here.
Picture of an offshore oil structure.
I'm going to try and get
it took
this
me a while
up
to figure out what that was, and I'm still not exactly sure.
I'm not sure either. The takeaway from this one here is that the current climate and energy system models typically don't explore the impacts of oil reservoir depletion.
Yeah.
These guys have to be aware of it.
Yeah.
But they're not looking at it.
Yeah, you've got to program that into your model or it's not going to be there. It doesn't happen automatically. Okay, should we go on?
Let's move along to the next one. Yeah.
Penn Energy gave us this one.
This one says that Solar Reserve, a company, receives environmental approval for a 390 megawatt solar thermal facility and storage in Chile. That's a big facility.
Yeah, it is indeed.
This, by the way, is not a PV.
Yeah, it's concentrated.
It's these concentrated solars.
Yeah.
They've got towers, they've got mirrors, and they can be very large.
They can be.
And in this case, they are.
Yeah, they can also, interestingly enough, be small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've seen some small ones in Spain or France or somewhere like that. Yep.
Yeah. Solar Reserve has received an environmental approval from the Chilean government to build a 390 megawatt solar thermal power station with 5,100 megawatt hours of energy storage. That'd keep Brattleboro going for a few days. This is Solar Reserve's third approach to a solar thermal project that will provide Chile with a continuous 24-hour supply of energy at a competitive price.
We got to ask you to repeat that sentence because that's important.
Which sentence?
The last one.
The last one. This is Solar Reserve's third approval.
Well, that will provide.
That will provide Chile with a continuous 24-hour supply of energy at a competitive price.
This is baseload power.
Yeah, this is the fact that this is a competitive price is a very big deal.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing that theme over and over and over again of solar thermal with storage. So you've basically got a 24-hour system, or a system that goes through the evening, which is when there's, it's one of the demand problem times.
This is the future.
Solar plus batteries, wind plus batteries, solar plus wind plus batteries.
Yep.
There's a whole bunch of different ways of doing this that don't require fossil fuels. So, go on.
Alrighty.
Our next one, it comes from Renew Economy.
Transgrid, which is the company, is saying 100% renewables is feasible and affordable.
Right.
Now, this article is about Australia, but
it works.
It works.
Yeah. Major transmission company Transgrid says 100% renewable energy is both feasible and affordable. It is urging policymakers to, quote, step out in large ways, end quote, because incremental change will not deliver climate goals or potential cost savings. Transgrid's head of regulation said the company would benefit from such a move, but so would consumers. And what they're saying here is...
Well, first of all, who's they?
Who? Transgrid.
These are the transmission people. These are not the people that are generating the power.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are buying it and getting it spread around. So.
Right. This is a transmission company, and it's like ISO New England or something like that.
Like that.
In some senses, it's even like Green Mountain Power, because Green Mountain Power is more of a transmission company and a billing company than it is a generating company. But this is a big company. And they're saying that they would rather be dealing with large quantities of renewables than do a small incremental transition, and it'll save a lot of money to really get into this big time.
Well, it happens that a lot of this is unique to Australia, where you have communities that are widely separated.
Yes. Although you have that in the western United States as well.
There's more so in Australia, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's
absolutely.
You got a city of maybe 100,000 people, then 100 miles before you go to the next city.
Yes. And another thing that they have in Australia, and this is something that's really...
They got kangaroos there.
Huh?
They got kangaroos there.
They do indeed. They have mining companies that are way out in the middle of no place. They're not near any city, and they're powered by...
They're almost their own city.
Yeah. So there's powered by solar and wind and with diesel backup and stuff like that. But they save a lot of money by using renewable systems. So we're on to Friday, July 21st, and I should mention... We got
a picture here coming up,
We do. I should mention that if you go to geoharvey.com and you want to find an article, you can click on the calendar date and get it there. So this is from Clean Technica.
Yeah, it's a nice CSX train.
Yeah.
I've always been a railroad buff, so
I wonder how many men are railroad buffs and how many are not.
Well, this is a major U.S. coal hauler, which is CSX.
Yes.
Speak truth to Trump. Fossil fuels are dead.
What can you
and they're
say?
putting their money where their mouth is.
They sure are. Just as the Trump administration was celebrating its, quote, Made in America week, end quote, the Financial Times reported that CSX is not planning to buy new locomotives to haul additional coal. In fact, it's laying off 700 workers. Its CEO told the Financial Times that, quote, fossil fuels are dead, end quote, and that, quote, coal is not a long-term issue, end quote, for the company. There, he sees there's been a slight uptick in coal consumption in the United States since Donald Trump became president.
Mostly from export.
I don't think he had any effect on that industry at all.
I don't think it's certainly not possible for it to happen in such a short period of time. Anyhow,
there was one coal mine that opened up. He took credit for that, and I've got to get that back again.
What happened here?
Well, it's one of those things. He took credit for it and said, "Look at what I've done," and then of course it turned out that it wasn't his doing at all.
Well, while you're fixing that, I'll talk about CSX.
That's a good idea.
It's a relatively new railroad that was developed out of Conrail.
Yeah.
And Chesapeake and Ohio, which is the C.
Yeah.
Seaboard Coastline, which is the S.
Yeah.
And the X doesn't mean anything. And they are one of the largest railroads in America today. And they do an awful lot in coal. And I've seen these trains. I mean, they're a mile long, nothing but coal cars.
Yeah. People who, particularly people around here in Vermont, who have never seen a long train, have got no concept.
They're almost as long as Vermont.
We used to sit. You know, I spent a fair part of my childhood in Illinois, and we used to sit at the crossing and count the cars go by. And I can remember trains that had 160 cars.
Well, I believe that. Yeah.
You know?
Well, these are interesting because when I was young, passenger trains ruled.
Yeah.
And they had it right away.
Yeah.
About eight years or so, I went out west by train and went out to Montana.
Yeah.
And I was amazed in that here's a passenger train highballing it along, and they shunted us into a siding. And what came by? A coal train.
Wow.
So we were second fiddle to coal trains. So there's been a definite change in railroading.
Yeah. Although my uncle, my mother's uncle actually, Uncle Charlie.
Did you fix that one or?
I did. Oh, did I? No, I didn't. Let's get it back to where it belongs. There we go.
There we go, by Jove. I think he's got it.
Yeah, I thought I fixed it. I still don't know what happened or what I did that fixed it. But
It was your elbow.
it was my elbow. Yeah, I've got to tuck my elbow.
Well, it's working again.
There you go. Uncle Charlie told me that when he was very young, he lied and got a job when he was 13 years old. And he worked on silk trains. And they had priority over everything, including
Worked on what kind of train?
silk trains.
Silk trains.
Yeah.
Wow.
Taking silk from the West Coast to New York City.
Wow.
Yeah.
For the garment industry.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what his job was, every time that train stopped, a bunch of people would jump off and they'd go racing down the train, just checking to make sure that there weren't any hot bearings.
Yeah, yeah. Anything could stop it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yep. Okay.
Well, by the way, according to this, this president of the company is foreseeing that coal will continue to be part of CSX business for the short term at least.
For the short term.
Another secondary consequence of this is that the companies that are making locomotives are all having layoffs.
Yeah.
So it's not just CSX is doing this.
Yeah. Okay, our next item comes from Valley News, and this is actually right here at home.
We're back home.
Yeah.
Vermont Governor starts a climate panel.
Wow.
Let me try.
Governor Phil Scott affirmed Vermont's commitment to meeting the state's long-term goal of getting 90% of its energy from renewable sources by 2050, and he created a commission to advise him on the best way to do it. He asked the 21-member commission to report back to him with an action plan by the 31st of July 2018.
That's just about a year from now.
Just about. Yep.
And he wants the commission to present him with 3 top ideas by the end of the year.
Yeah. I know one person on the commission. I didn't really look at the list. Joey Miller over at VNRC is on it. But she's a very nice lady.
I don't know her.
Well, you should.
Probably. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Our next
Not
item.
much more to talk about that one, but it's a good development.
Yes, it is. Our next item comes from Power Engineering International. And why
And we got a picture here.
We have a picture of the Houses of Parliament. Okay.
And we got a nice bridge there, which I think is the real London Bridge. The pictures that people call the London Bridge aren't. They're the Tower Bridge.
Yes, I know. And then there's the London Bridge that moved to New Mexico or whatever it was.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I think this was what replaced that bridge.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, let's talk about this one. Renewables account for UK generation records as coal slumps further.
A report by energy market analysts NAPSIS says renewable energy sources set a host of records in the UK in the second quarter of 2017. Renewable energy was up 56% from the same period last year. That is a lot. Meanwhile, the report also showed coal plants struggling in the quarter and produced less than 2% of total generation.
Yeah.
That's a big drop.
I got some numbers here. Gas-fired power stations generated 38% of output. Gas-fired plants remain more economically viable than coal. Nuclear units generated 23%, coal 2%, and imports 7.5%.
Yeah.
And renewables are a small number of that overall number, but they're growing.
Yes. They are growing. They're growing fast. Even in the UK, which doesn't support them all that much, except for Scotland.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
Okay, should we go on?
Saturday, July 22nd.
We are there. We have an item from Clean Technica.
UK businesses and investors urge PM to raise climate ambitions. And we're going to find out what PM means right away. By the way, this is an important article.
Yeah.
This one is something, if you read one, you should look at this one. This has a lot of meat in it.
Yep. A group of businesses and investors have written to Prime Minister PM Theresa May, urging her to raise the UK's ambitions. The group represents thousands of companies with hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue and hundreds of investors managing assets worth more than $19 trillion, pounds, 19 trillion pounds. The letter is a clarion call from the UK business sector. And you know, this divide between businesses that want renewable power and want to get off of fossil fuels and businesses that want to promote fossil fuels is getting more and more pronounced.
More of a gap. We'll talk about that a little bit more later.
Yeah.
It's coming up. There's a quick takeaway from this one. This came from the article. Transition to a low-carbon economy is the only way forward. The impact of climate change on our lives is clearer than ever.
Yeah, I'm actually writing an article for Green Energy Times, and I might do something for Clean Technica as well, about damage that's being done by climate change to the U.S. economy and the Vermont economy and people's health and so forth right now. And some of the stuff that I'm seeing is just scary. I don't know what the cost is to the American economy, but I don't see how you could look at flood insurance premiums without...
Oh, they have skyrocketed.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're talking 500%, 1,000% increases on certain properties, shorefront properties. Some shorefront properties are uninsurable now.
Uninsurable. And, you know, between 1978 and 2014, you would have expected that the insurance rates would have gone up because of inflation, because of increased population, which means you've got more housing to insure, because of a general tendency for property values to be higher relative to the inflated value of the dollar. There are people who have invested in places that are more vulnerable, but there's also been a counteraction to that because of the Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2004 that says you can't
build in certain places.
Well, you can build, but you can't be insured.
Okay.
You see, if you make two claims, if you make two claims on your insurance, you have no guarantee of insurance anymore.
Wow.
So the upshot of this is that you would have expected that the flood insurance premiums would have been multiplied by about 5.5 or 6. They weren't. They were multiplied by 43.
Wow. 43.
43. They went from, you would have expected them, they started at $82 million in 1978. You would have expected them to go from there to about 500 million, but they went to 3.5 billion. And that only represents somewhere between a tenth and a fifth of the actual damage that was done by floods. So what that means is the flooding that we never anticipated, we shouldn't have had to anticipate, is costing this country somewhere between $15 and $30 billion a year in damage. And that doesn't even count the amount of money that places like Miami are putting into raising roads because of flooding. $500 million right there. And, you know, I think that it looks to me like before you're done, we could be looking at bills that are already in the vicinity of $100 billion a year. And they just keep going up. So when are people going to stand up on this and just say, well, enough is enough? And it's not just floods. It's
You're talking
diseases.
nonsense. This is all a myth.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and Lyme disease was invented in Peking. Okay.
You got a picture
We
coming
have
up
a picture coming up. It's a picture of transmission lines and a little bit of fog. And the
Let's
sun.
get that picture up.
Now that
here.
is a rising sun. I can guarantee that's a rising.
Can you?
Absolutely. You wouldn't have fog like that in the evening.
Good point. Bingo. Yeah, I'll give you that one.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back close to home here.
Yeah.
Governor Cuomo
Yeah.
announces plan to rebuild 78 miles of power transmission infrastructure in the North Country.
This is from LongIsland.com. I don't know why Long Island people would be interested in the North Country. Yeah, actually they do. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced plans to build 78 miles of power transmission infrastructure in the North Country. It will help New York meet the governor's clean energy standard that mandates 50% of the state's consumed electricity comes from renewable energy sources like wind and solar by 2030.
Well, this by itself isn't all that important,
Yeah.
but it's happening in about 5 or 6 different places in New York.
Yes.
This particular one, they call it the Moses Adirondack Smart Path Reliability Project.
It's
Not
not
named after the biblical guy, but rather after
a guy
Robert
named Moses Adirondacks.
No, it's Robert Moses. And he was a big promoter of parks.
Yes.
He was responsible for Adirondack Park, and stuff like that.
Was he the one who was also responsible for the what was the name of that road?
Taconic State Parkway?
Well,
He was responsible for that one.
Okay. I was thinking of the Sawmill Parkway.
He probably was, yeah. I would say he was. Because he did that kind of stuff.
Yeah. This Sawmill Parkway has low bridges over it, so that you
So
can't,
does the Taconic State.
so you can't drive buses and
Well, it was intended for passenger cars.
yeah, they wanted to keep the buses off.
Well, buses, trucks.
Yeah.
It was a parkway.
Yes.
It was for the people to drive, not
Yeah.
not for commerce.
Okay.
Well, this thing runs from Messina to Canton in the western Adirondacks. There's an existing line there that was built in 1942.
Yeah.
Okay, so what they're doing is upgrading it
Yeah.
from 230 volts to 345 volts.
Okay.
kV, not
Kilovolts,
volts,
yeah.
kilovolts. But this is interesting because they're only going to run it at 230. They're preparing for the future.
Yes.
Okay, because it's going to be there.
Yes.
They're going to need it, and when they need it, all they got to do is pipe up the voltage because the lines are going to be there already.
Yes.
This is kind of anticipation.
This is and my recollection is that this upgrade is going to be following the same route as the transmission lines that they have now.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
So
they're
this
upgrading.
it's not putting anybody out.
No, it's the same route. They're tearing the towers down. They're putting up new towers. They had wooden towers. They're putting up steel towers. They're going to be bigger, but it's the same route. It's not going to impinge on the area. I mean, people
Right.
aren't even going to know what's happening.
We hope. Anyway, our next item is from Clean Technica.
Okay, back to Massachusetts.
Yes.
Massachusetts Bay State Wind, that's the company, Bay State Wind, receives BOEM, which we're going to find out is, First Wind Site Assessment Plan approval. This is, even though it's hard to say, this is pretty big.
Yeah. The U.S. Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, that's BOEM, has issued its first approval for an offshore wind site assessment plan to the Bay State Wind offshore wind farm being developed by Dong Energy and Eversource Energy. Dong, by the way, is an acronym that works both in English and in Danish for Danish oil and natural gas, although
They got out of
that business and they just retained the acronym. The area off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, that has a potential for at least 2 gigawatts of capacity.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's a lot. By the way, this is going to be about 15 miles directly south of Martha's Vineyard.
Which means that
It's way out in the middle of nowhere.
you would not.
There's no way you can see it from land.
Yeah.
Except maybe from Martha's Vineyard.
Well, you could see it from Martha's Vineyard if you had really good eyes.
Yeah, or binoculars.
On a day that permits that. But you know, you're going to be looking through atmosphere that's right near the water, and there's a lot of. It's very hazy.
This isn't going to be a big obstacle, I don't think.
No, it's not.
Interesting part of the article was they've got these meteorological buoys that are going to be measuring the current for the next 2 or 3 years. And these are fantastic. They look like ships. They don't look like regular buoys.
No, they don't.
But they're all filled out with instruments. They got about 25 antennas on them. Very interesting things.
I looked at that and I thought, where do the people live? Okay, we are up to Sunday.
Got another picture here.
July 23rd.
We got another
Here
picture
is
here.
Alan Scoggins in Good Times. It doesn't look very good, but
Is that Alan Scott?
it's Alan Scoggins, Georgia farmer.
Scoggins, Sonny Scoggins. Sonny Scoggins. He might be Alan too.
Okay.
Yeah. Say hi to Sonny.
Yeah, this is from the Chattanooga Times Free Press.
Chattanooga. Research says region's crops will feel impact of global warming. Now this is a second order consequence we don't think too much about.
Right. One farmer in Georgia said the past 2 years have brought the worst weather he has ever seen. And this guy has been farming for a long time. There were catfish in his cornfields 1 year and drought the next.
Literally catfish.
Literally catfish. Until
3 feet long.
Yeah, 3 feet long in the cornfield. Until recently, he hadn't considered global warming too deeply. He's paying attention now as climate scientists are predicting increasingly difficult weather. And this is part of a general thing about that is really this is going to hit the South.
Well, this article is all about the South, from Mississippi, Tennessee. He came from Tennessee, but mostly it's from Georgia, Mississippi.
Yep.
And these farmers are getting hit hard. They're having rain, drought followed by heavy rain, followed by more drought.
Yep.
This particular guy lost 85% of his soy and 50% of his hay 1 year.
Yeah.
2 years ago, or 2 years before this article was written.
And that was after losing his entire corn crop. So this is the previous year.
But not to worry. A survey found that 56% of the people in Walker County, which is I guess where he comes from, are not worried about global warming.
Okay.
Nationally is 42%, but here where it's really happening, so what, you know.
They will find out, I'm afraid.
Well, they're not all in farming. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, but
the farmers are aware. You better believe that.
The farmers are putting a lot of money into the local economy. And if that money dries up, the local economy dries up.
There's no question about it. Everybody should be aware of it.
Yeah, and of course the farmers are feeding us. And in the meantime, was it the same article? It said that things might get better in the north.
It did say that. They're going to get slightly better in the north.
It's just dandy. If the farmers in Vermont want to give up on maple syrup because they won't be able to harvest it anymore.
That is what's one of the things going to be happening.
Yeah, and then switch to pawpaws.
Well, Georgia peaches, Vermont peaches, it's coming.
Tad Montgomery gave me I forget what it was. It was some kind of muffin or something that had a almost like an icing on top that was made out of pawpaw.
Good.
And it was delicious.
I'm not sure I even know what they are.
A pawpaw tree has big leaves and it has fruit that look like potatoes.
I'll be darned. Okay.
But they don't taste like potatoes. They're very sweet, and I've read that only a small boy can eat more than one at a time.
Interesting.
Okay. We have an item from the Hindustan Times.
We don't have
no
a
picture on this.
This is a good article, though.
It's
a good interview with an expert.
Yes.
And it's an interesting interview.
Yes. Future
of renewable energy. Sunny investment climate for solar technology in India.
Solar prices have fallen 73% in India since 2010. That's a big fall. Renewable energy could generate 49% of the electricity in India by 2040 because more efficient batteries will provide flexibility of use and boost the reach of renewables, cutting the cost of solar energy by a further 66% over current costs according to a Bloomberg report, and I read these percentages, and I hear they have fallen 73%. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Renewable energy could generate 49% by 2040. Do you think it will? I'll bet it'll be more like 80%.
Yeah, it's going to be more.
And a further 66% fall in current costs for solar energy. Well, if you're talking about the energy, that might be true because of the cost in batteries. But I wonder how much the cost of solar panels can continue to fall. Of course, I used to be a computer engineer, and I remember back around 1992 or 3, somebody was saying, well, we're not going to be able to speed these things up very much anymore, because the thing that constrains the transfer rate is the speed of light, and it's only a foot from here to there. And,
how many angels can dance on the head of a pin?
Well, what happened, of course, was that other engineers, besides the guy who was talking to me, had figured out a bunch of different ways of making things a whole lot faster that he hadn't thought of. So maybe I'm wrong about that.
But anyway. Quick takeaway from this one is, along with food and water security, energy security drives strategic thinking in all nations.
Yes, absolutely.
Something you don't think about.
All nations except the United States.
It will.
Yeah.
Okay, it's happening in the United States.
Yeah,
it's just not happening on the governmental level.
Well, there are people who have air in their heads. And Monday, July 14th.
Yeah, we got a picture here.
We have a picture. This is something that I find kind of interesting.
It is. Yeah, let's get it up here.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, this is from BBC News.
And that is a picture of a
tugboat towing a wind turbine.
A couple of tugboats, but yep, this is a floating wind turbine, and they're bringing it out to sea.
Yep.
And that's what it says.
Yep.
World's first floating wind farm emerges off the coast of Scotland.
The world's first full-scale floating wind farm has started to take shape off the northeast coast of Scotland. The technology will allow wind power to be harvested in water too deep for current conventional bottom-standing turbines, especially in Japan and the west coast of the United States. This will open new markets for offshore wind power.
This is also interesting. First of all, as you just say, it opens up brand new markets.
Yeah.
Because they're out to sea.
Absolutely.
They're tethered to the bottom with a kilometer-long cable. But they're not going anywhere. Where did I find this thing? Yeah. The turbines can operate in water up to a kilometer deep. The output is expected to equal or surpass regular turbines. Okay, so they're not losing anything here. The blades harness breakthrough software. This is the interesting thing. It holds the tower upright by twisting the blades to dampen motions from wind and waves. So as these things bob, they sense this and they make adjustments.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kind of mind-blowing here.
Well, we're in an age where what's happened is computers are coming into their own in terms of regulating things.
They can do things that we never dreamed they could do.
This is like the
they're doing a dance out there.
Yeah, it's kind of like the what do they call those jets that fly around? You can't see them. They're stealth jets.
Yeah.
Those stealth jets have got flat surfaces. How do you get an airplane to have lift with flat surfaces?
They figured that one out.
They figured it out, and a lot of it has to do with computer-driven technology.
Yeah, definitely.
So, this is the same kind of thing. You get a lot of power out of these things because of computer-driven technology.
Interesting takeaway here. The bird charity, Royal Society for Protection of Birds, Scotland,
yes,
not the English one, opposed the project.
Yes.
Not because it dislikes the technology, but because it believes too many offshore turbines in the area have already been approved, and they're afraid of bird deaths.
The Royal Society for Protection of Birds, and this, of course, is the Scottish chapter of that, is one of the most effective organizations in the world when it comes to stopping wind farms from being developed. And but they only go after about 7% of them, because the rest of them,
They have one of their own
They
wind
have
turbines,
they have
yeah.
a very pretty wind turbine of their own. They want to make sure that the birds survive. This isn't a matter of kill all wind turbines. This is a matter of
They're very selective. They're looking at these things.
I want to make sure that the net effect of this wind farm is not going to be negative on birds.
So they're doing a good job.
They are. Most wind farms, birds get killed, but the fossil fuels industry, for generating a gigawatt hour of power, will kill 20 to 40 times as many birds.
Well, the cooling towers, we don't ever hear about that. Birds crash into them all the time.
They crash into the cooling towers. I went to find out how many birds were killed by wind turbines, and I found that in 2012, the kind of middle of the road estimate was 440,000 birds, which is about how many birds would be killed in a chicken processing plant on one line in 3 days. And when I was doing that, I thought, how do you get these estimates? Is this accurate? And so I went looking for papers that would talk about the accuracy of that. And I came across a paper that talked about the number of birds that were killed in a single site producing electric power. They actually inventoried. And they had to estimate a lot of birds because they'd find a pile of feathers. How did the bird die? Well, we don't know. So if they tried to, they just estimated about 2/3 of the deaths that they talked about were estimated, and about 1/3 of them were actual inventory counts. But they came up with 5,000 birds in their inventory period of 2 days, 48 hours.
That's a lot of birds.
It's a lot of birds. Now,
the big buildings go
nationwide,
birds too.
Nationwide, 440,000 birds in a year is one bird every 73 seconds. In that one site, they were killing one bird every 35 seconds. But there weren't any wind turbines.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you?
The information is skewed a little bit, I
Yeah,
think.
well, people who are complaining about wind turbines killing birds are not taking into account that the wind turbines are replacing things that are killing birds a lot faster.
It's an interesting way to look at it.
And
It's accurate.
there's another way of dealing with birds, and that's just don't use electricity, don't use energy. Live in a cave and dress warmly instead of having a fire.
Yeah, right.
Come on. Okay.
Okay. The next one is from, who is it from?
ABC Online, which is not American Broadcast Company. It's Australian.
Sunshine Coast Council stays true to its name by opening its own solar farm in a local government. And by the way, the Sunshine Coast is just about the easternmost part of all of Australia.
And it's a city with a population that's about 270,000
It's got some
people.
beautiful beaches.
Yeah. When it comes to tackling rising energy prices, the Queensland Council has taken an innovative approach and has built its own $50 million solar farm to fully offset all its power needs. The Sunshine Coast Council is now the first local government in Australia with 100% of its electricity consumption from a renewable source.
Interesting takeaway here. I can't quite figure it out. It said it's the first solar farm in Australia to operate at 1,500 volts DC.
Ah.
And I don't see how they can do that. I mean, there are ways they could do it, but I'd like to know a little bit more about that one. Because the panels operate about 12 to 20 volts.
No, not necessarily. Some of them are high. I don't know. I don't know what the answer
Well,
to
the
that is.
individual panels aren't going to be high.
No, they're
But
not.
They array them in such
Yeah.
a way that
I
you're getting
just don't know the
300,
answer to
400
that.
volts out.
Yeah.
That's probably what they're doing. They're arraying these things. They're hooking them all up in series so
Yeah.
that they're getting high voltage.
We've got 16 minutes to go, and we have 7 items, so we're going to have to
We can do
cruise
that.
through this.
Okay.
Our next item comes from phys.org.
And we got a
Phys,
picture here.
PHYS. Whoops, I just knocked the picture off. There it is.
Yeah, there we go.
And that is the picture of the Platte River,
That's the Platte River.
where my mother was born.
Oh, good.
Yeah, she was born in Plattsmouth. That's a little upstream, probably. It's probably in Colorado, which means that she's born about as close to this site as we are to Philadelphia.
That's a pretty dreary looking picture here.
Yeah, it is.
Hindcasting study.
Yeah.
Hindcasting as opposed to forecasting.
Yes.
Hindcasting study investigates the extreme 2013 Colorado flood.
In September of 2013, severe storms struck Colorado and with prolonged heavy rainfall, dumping more than 17 inches of rain, causing the Platte River to reach record flood levels. Now, in a paper that appeared online at Weather and Climate Extremes, a team of scientists reports that climate change greatly increased the storm severity. They have algorithms that are being used now where they can look at a problem and say such and such a percentage of this problem probably came from climate change. And they're getting very good at that.
Well, in this article, there's a animated loop of the water vapor systems over Colorado.
Yes.
And it seems that this storm just kept circulating around
It's
and
very
around
much
and
like
around.
the no-name storm in Louisiana, the 2016 storm in the
One that wouldn't go away.
Wouldn't go away. It just rain and rain and rain and rain and rain.
This
and
was
it
the same thing. It just kept...
dumped a multiple of the amount of rain that Hurricane Katrina did. Okay, we're up to Tuesday, July 25th.
let's see what we got
And
coming
we
up
have
next
an
Another
article
picture.
from The Guardian. Yes, we do have a picture.
coming up. There we go. Stormy day.
Yeah.
Household batteries will be the key to UK's new energy strategy.
Batteries and renewable power are on the verge of bringing about an epochal transformation of the UK that could make clean energy clean, abundant, and very cheap, according to a cabinet minister. He said the government plans for a more flexible energy system and £2,046 million of funding for battery research would radically bring down bills.
Well, what the article is basically saying, a more flexible national electricity grid is the key.
Yeah.
The variable nature of renewables means energy networks need storage, which is batteries, and the ability to automatically reduce electricity demand from willing businesses and households.
Yeah.
These are the smart appliances that are coming.
And this is the...
And the key word there is willing.
Yes.
You know, they're not going to force it down your throat.
Yes.
They're going to make it attractive for you to do it.
Yeah, by lowering your bills. Okay, we should move on. Our next item is from The Hill.
From the Hill.
From the Hill.
Let's get you up here or get us
Get
both
me
up
up.
here. Climate change will heat up midterm elections.
Yeah, I think it will. The midterm congressional elections are still a year away, but hundreds of rookie candidates are crafting policy positions for the first time. Most of them are Democrats, spurred by polls showing their party with an edge for 2018. In previous elections, many candidates glossed over their positions on climate change, but it looks like that could change.
There's a whole list of things that they're recommending, and we don't have time to read them.
No,
but,
it's worth
go
reading.
to the article and look them up. There's about 10 or 12 items there.
That was still on Tuesday, July 25th. Our next item, and
It's
thanks
still
to,
on Tuesday.
Yeah, still on Tuesday. This is from the New York Times, and Tad Montgomery found this and sent it to me.
A cheap fix for climate change? Pay people not to chop down trees. Duh.
Yeah. A team of researchers has shown that there is a surprisingly cheap and easy way to slow down the pace of deforestation in Uganda. Just pay landowners small sums not to cut their trees down. The study was published in the journal Science. And of course, if it's going to happen in Uganda this way, it's probably going to happen the same way in Indonesia or the Amazon.
It's a big problem in Uganda.
Yeah. But it's a problem,
It's a problem in a lot of places.
In a lot of places. So, and it's just a question of what's a cost-effective way of dealing with climate change. Well, this happens to be a cost-effective way of dealing with climate change.
Well, the mechanism they're talking about here is when trees are cut down and decompose or are burned, they release the carbon dioxide that they soaked up from the atmosphere.
Right.
So keeping them intact can help slow the pace of global warming.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Logical.
absolutely. So we're up to Wednesday, July 26th.
Yeah, we got a nice
We
picture
have a picture
here.
of a Waymo Chrysler and an article from Clean Technica.
Well, Waymo is a company that makes self-driving cars, or makes the technology.
Yes.
They don't make the cars,
Yeah.
but they have a deal where they've put together a lot of these Chryslers.
Yes.
Caltrans is already modifying California's roads for self-driving cars.
How about that?
They realize that it's coming.
Yep. The California Department of Transportation, Caltrans, has already begun altering California's roadways so as to better accommodate the rollout of self-driving vehicles. It is doing so mostly by better accommodating the way that many self-driving vehicles navigate. This news comes from recent comments from the director of Caltrans. I read an article about self-driving cars in Australia, and they had one thing that would appear on the roads that for some reason the cars were finding very difficult to figure out, and so they were having accidents with it, and that was kangaroos. The cars were not were not programmed to deal with kangaroos, but a simple software fix apparently was enough for that.
Well, one of the things they're doing is they're making the lane lines thicker.
Yes.
And another thing they're doing is apparently, I've never driven in California, but they've got these things called box dots. And they're little rounded raised markers on the California roads.
Okay.
And the automatic cars here can't recognize those things. So they're just going to eliminate them.
Yeah. Okay. Now are we going to move on from that?
Well, we got two more items to talk about, so let's.
Yeah, okay. The next one is from The Wire, and this is something I find very disturbing.
U.S. electric industry informed of climate change dangers decades ago, claims report.
Yeah. Documents released by the California-based Energy and Policy Institute show that a member of President Lyndon B. Johnson's administration warned the Edison Electric Institute's industry group at its 1968 annual convention. This was at the convention. That carbon emissions from fossil fuels would change the climate and trigger catastrophic effects.
This is almost 50 years ago.
Almost. Now, it was a little over 50 years ago. In fact, it was 50 years last November, so it was 50 and a half years, that scientists went to Lyndon Johnson and said, we've got a problem.
Yeah.
And Lyndon Johnson turned that problem over. Apparently, I might be wrong here, but he apparently turned that problem over to the Edison Electric Institute, which proceeded to sweep it under the rug.
The Edison Electric Institute, for those who don't know, it's like a trade group for the electrical industry.
Yeah.
And all the manufacturers belong to it. And utilities belong to it.
And they're not terribly happy about changing, the changes in the infrastructure that are going on in the United States right now.
Well, they're a trade group.
Yeah.
They lobby.
Yeah.
They're out after their own interests.
Yeah.
They, as a sideline, do a pretty good job of making publications available to engineers. But
yes,
they do a lot of things. But one of the things they're doing is lobbying. Yes. Always have been.
Always have been. And our last item is from BBC News.
New diesel and petrol vehicles to be banned from 2040 in the UK. That's 23 years from now. That's coming up quick.
New diesel and petrol cars and vans will be banned in the UK from 2040 in a bid to tackle air pollution, the government is set to announce. The ministers will also unveil a £255 million fund to help councils tackle emissions from diesel vehicles. A £3 billion package of spending on air quality responds to High Court deadline. The High Court, in fact, we talked about this several months ago. The High Court in the UK told the government that it wasn't doing enough.
Yeah.
And that's
what this article is about.
That's what this article is about. I remember that we talked about it. I just don't remember when it was that came up. But this is a response to that. And the UK is not the first country. The Netherlands did it, India did it, France did it. And what's happening here is that we're seeing more and more companies setting dates, but I think these dates are unrealistic. I think they're unrealistic because I think that once people get the idea that we're going to be moving away from gas and oil-powered vehicles, they're going to be moving much, much faster to electric vehicles.
When the infrastructure exists,
yes,
and it's coming,
yes,
there's going to be a sea change.
And when that infrastructure comes in, it means other infrastructure is going to close down.
Yeah, well,
You know, if you think about local gas stations, for example, it would make sense for a local gas station to put in
charging stations.
but and replace its gasoline with those. But what is going to happen is the percentage of cars that are gasoline based, the actual raw number of cars that are gasoline based and diesel based will go down. And as that happens, you've got a town with 10 gas stations in it. Every single one of those gas stations is going to find itself in a depressed business state.
Yeah,
Some of them are going to go out of business.
for sure.
When that happens, the other ones get a little bit of a boost. But this is not an industry that I think that people are going to be excited about. It's not going to be an industry that's growing. It's going to be an industry that is reducing in size. And that's one of the problems that we have in this whole thing of fossil fuels, is that the fossil fuels industry has always been set on the idea that it was going to grow.
Forever.
Forever. It's an unsustainable business model, but businesses, particularly in the United States, all want to grow forever.
Absolutely.
You know, they want to take over the universe and you know, they want to be the black hole at the center of the galaxy.
I read a book long time ago that was set in the future, which is like about now.
Yes.
And at this particular time in the future, there was only going to be 5 corporations left in the world, and they owned everything.
Yes.
We're heading that
Socialism.
way.
That's called socialism.
Sort of, yeah. Yeah. Except the corporations weren't the government.
Yeah, well, I
It's
mean,
a different form of socialism.
it's a different form,
Yeah.
you know. But who cares? In either case, you've got
You got no choice.
yeah, you've got a what's the word for a government by a limited number of people?
Oligarchy.
Oligarchy. And in either case, you're going to have the same kind of oligarchy. It's going to run through what's called a caucustocracy.
So who?
Caucustocracy.
Caucustocracy.
It means government by people who are incompetent and corrupt,
Oh, okay.
which is what we've got in
What we got
Washington
now.
now. Yeah, absolutely. So,
One of the things that I took away from here, it does not include a scrappage scheme.
yes,
So that was apparently discussed and discarded because it was too expensive.
yes, and there was something else that it didn't include. There have been a bunch of articles that have appeared in the last day. This article appeared the day before yesterday. I got it yesterday morning. There were a bunch of articles that appeared since then, and they were talking about the shortcomings of this. And one of the things that they said was the amount of money that's involved in this is minuscule compared to what's needed.
I think I remember reading that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess we're kind of done for the day.
There was a second order consequence
Oh, okay.
buried in here that I'll talk about.
Okay,
The
good.
national grid would come under pressure with a mass switch on of recharging after the rush hour.
Well, but that's not what's going to happen. You know that as well as I do. This whole thing is going to be done with a smart grid, so you don't have a mass switch on for recharging at the end of
Good
the
point.
rush hour.
Good point. Yeah.
You know.
That went right over my head.
Yeah, it's one of the problems that we've got is that there are a lot of ideas out there, a lot of people out there, a lot of things going on, and a lot of the people who are writing about this and who are making business decisions about this are really unaware of the broad scale of things. And
Well, this is a major change in our economy. It
oh, it's
really
huge,
is.
absolutely huge. But you know, one of the things 2 years ago, I looked at the list of the largest companies by revenue in the world.
We've talked about this.
Yeah.
Yep.
In order to be on the list, you had to make $100 billion in revenues. And at that time, Koch Industries and 21 oil and gas companies were among the 63 companies on the list. And today, there are 52 companies on the list. Our biggest companies are just
They're banks, aren't they?
in trouble. And of those, Koch Industries is no longer in the list, and the oil and gas sector only has 7 instead of 21. So what happens when a company, and all 7 of those have lost at least 30% of their revenues in the last year.
Well, the price of oil has dropped dramatically.
Absolutely. So what happens to a company that is big like that, and it has oil wells, and it has refineries, and it has pipelines, and it has delivery systems, and it has all kinds of stuff? What happens to them when they lose 30% of their revenue? And the answer to that is they're in the red. Because they've got to support their infrastructure. They're losing money. Now, I don't know that all those companies are losing money, but they are in trouble. And unfortunately for them, the trouble that they're in, actually fortunately, because it'll save their lives, but the trouble that they're in is one from which they are not going to be able to recover. And the quicker they recognize that, the better off they're going to be.
Good point.
Yeah, we have to go.
I think it's that time.
It is. So, ladies and gentlemen, we hope to see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. We spin and we toil, we work all day, sowing and reaping, we store goods away, so we can be dressed well on the day that we die. We dig and drill and waste what we find, break up the earth, leaving little behind, but we will grow lilies in the by and by. I want to point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land so lovely earth can stay lovely still.